Bonneton. It's a dark and dreary place, and with good reason. Its gloomy aesthetic mirrors the tragedy and trauma faced by not only the kingdom, but Mario himself. Despite being the very first world in the game, essentially a tutorial level, it is also the world in which our fateful hero meets his untimely end. Mario was dead to begin with, and there is no doubt about that whatsoever.
Hold it.
Maxwell, do you mind? I'm in the middle of recording here.
Yeah, I can see that. And for some reason, I've found it in my good graces to stop you from making this travesty of a video.
Excuse me?
Were you really going to go along with that old cliche? Mario was dead all along? What happened? Did he meet a terrible fate? That's funny. I didn't see MatPat written on the office door.
So then what do you suggest I talk about?
Think, numbskull. What about all the war references?
What war references?
Did you even play the game? We don't work for Polygon.
Hey now.
Hey yourself. Think, man, think.
Well, it's gray.
Yes.
It's occupied by ghosts. It's full of hats. The airships were hats, the ghosts were all wearing hats, and the tops of buildings were hats.
So you were paying attention. What hats were they?
Top hats?
The kind of hat you would stereotypically associate with what city?
London, I guess?
There you go. Seems like using this noggin does help.
There was an air raid by Bowser's forces and... Oh dear.
You're welcome. Think you can do the rest without me?
Mario made a reference to the Blitz!
Luxton?
Oh, this is horrible! Nintendo, why?
Roll intro.
This is a pretty incredible discovery, if I do say so myself, and I probably wouldn't have seen it if it wasn't for Andy, one of our writers, so kudos. But the Cap Kingdom does indeed seem to be based off of London, and other metropolitan areas, following the Blitzkrieg by the Nazi German Air Force, or Luftwaffe, that word. And a lot of the features and the general gray aesthetic hints to this. When Mario is flung from Bowser's airship after failing to save Princess Peach, he crash lands in the dark and foreboding world of the Cap Kingdom. Where you lie, there are humped hills, textured with lighter gray lines. Between the hills is a thick rolling fog, and in the distance you can see a tower, your destination, with one of Bowser's airships circling it, silhouetted against a yellowed moon. The first inhabitant you meet is a ghost named Cappy, who's holding the shreds of Mario's old cap and poking at his lifeless corpse. Until he wakes up, then he's fine. But really though, the whole area gives a really spooky vibe, like something out of a Tim Burton movie. Yeah, those ones. Nonetheless, you are the hero of this story, Mario, so you travel onwards, unfaltering, as only a determined plumber could be. You cross a bridge and meet more inhabitants before entering through wrought iron gates into a main area. Here you discover that the Cap Kingdom has become victim to an air raid by Bowser's fleet, destroying the kingdom's airships, leaving Mario's only means of giving chase up in the sky in the form of one of Bowser's own airships. However, if you stick around to explore, the astute might start to notice some uncanny parallels with the 1930s and 1940s. Let's begin with the theme of this land: hats. The inhabitants of the Cap Kingdom are friendly Boo-like beings that, depending on their gender, are wearing one of two hats. A top hat for the lads, and a cloche for the ladettes. Let's start with the female Bonnetons. The cloche is a fitted hat with a wider brim, traditionally made from felt, and it is bell-shaped, hence the name. Cloche is French for bell. The hat was first invented in 1908, but came into vogue in the 1920s with the rise of Art Deco design, and a number of famous wearers such as Joan Crawford and Josephine Baker helped cause it to boom in popularity. And so, this hat remained very popular through the 30s and throughout World War II. This particular style of hat was so popular, it would go on to influence other fashion and hairstyles, resulting in the Ettenkrop, a short hairstyle for women similar to today's pixie cut. While more flamboyant hats of this style would be decorated with flashy embellishments such as flowers, beads, and ribbons, the traditional appearance was a simple felt hat with a band dividing the brim from the fitted section of the hat, sometimes with a single bow on the side. The hats worn by the female Bonnetons are without a doubt this cloche-style hat. Now, the cloche hat did become popular once again in the 60s and has remained somewhat popular until today, though the production of these hats is very different today, and they are more commonly made from materials not available at the time, and are more modernly decorated. Nonetheless, this hat alone isn't sufficient to date the era in which Bonneton is mimicking. So let's take a look at the male Bonnetons. Historically, London has been very famous for its gentlemen's hats. London has been home to many famous hatters throughout the ages. In fact, the oldest modern hatter is located in London, established in the mid-1600s. In 1662, the road that leads to St. Peter's Palace in London started to see storefronts built on either side. And over the next few decades, St. James's Street would grow and become a fashionable commercial thoroughfare for the upper class, with important customers from some of England's most important families in society. This popularity grants many independent craftsmen an opportunity to have their wares seen by London's well-to-do. One such entrepreneur was hatter Robert Davis, who opened his doors on St. James Street in 1676, and his store would eventually become James Lock & Company Limited. And some of their highest-selling premier products? The top hat and the bowler hat. One of the most famous accounts of the first ever top hat was printed in the Hatter's Gazette, and accredits a haberdasher by the name of John Hetherington with the invention of Hatter's Plush, the fine silk material used in the making of silken top hats, as well as causing a riot when wearing it for the first time. The hat is described as being large and shiny, and designed to intimidate the timid. Most historians regard this story as humorous, and nothing more than a tall tale, however. But that is something to keep note of. The top hat soon became a staple headwear in London through the centuries, only suffering a decline in popularity immediately after World War II. But it's not just the Bonneton people that hold a connection to hats. The buildings, lamps, and airships are all also shaped like top hats. The focal point of this area, imaginatively named Hat Tower, which we'll talk in more detail about later, allows you to run around the rim of the hat that makes up the top floors of the tower. The texture of this surface suggests that the tower's hat adornment is indeed made of felt. And looking out to the distant buildings, many of them are also wearing hats, so we can assume that they too are actually felt hats. However, it's the airships that are the most interesting. They are clearly silk hats, such as the one described in the Hetherington story. A large hat coated in hatter's plush, and being as these are airships, they most certainly would be designed to intimidate. We know that they are indeed silk hats too, because the damage on the airships are tears and burns in their silk coating, revealing the metal structure underneath. The hats do an excellent job at starting to identify the location and the era that the Cap Kingdom is meant to be mimicking. But there's more to it than simply hats. In fact, there is the entire aesthetic. While there is some color in the Cap Kingdom, the only objects that are not monochrome in their design seem to be objects from outside the Cap Kingdom itself. The brightly colored hats of the Crazy Hat Shop, and the posters of Peach and Bowser's upcoming marriage. There are also the crates, but you can find these crates in other worlds too, so they are likely shipping crates from outside kingdoms. This monochrome nature is likely to imitate the appearance of monochrome photographs and create an aesthetic link to the time period of the 1930s and 40s. However, I've not just claimed that the Cap Kingdom is connected to the 30s and 40s London, but specifically World War II's Blitz of London. And this is where things get a little darker. The buildings in the back would be fitting of this time as well. 1940s London was full of very tall buildings for the time, of course, 4 to 6 stories high. But most interesting of all is the main landmark, the Hat Tower. Take a look at these buildings from 1940s London. Tall, cylindrical white towers, perfect for placing a hat on. These were the St. James and Pall Mall electric light companies. And here's one in Battersea. They powered and lit the streets of London. In fact, all electric companies at the time had these very large, tall white towers. And interestingly, at this point, Mario doesn't have his airship. He leaves the Cap Kingdom through an electrical line from this tower, which may further solidify that connection. But what does that have to do with the Blitz? Well, these tall white towers were easy targets, first of all, and that will become more important later. At the center of the main area of the Cap Kingdom, there are 2 white painted brick bunkers. These bunkers are built directly into mounds of earth. And it was at this point that it fully dawned on us that we are indeed dealing with World War II era Britain. These 2 bunkers closely resemble air raid shelters that could be found in London and other metropolitan areas during the time of the Blitz. While not all air raid shelters were made from brick, most people had to make do with what materials and junk they could get their hands on. Cities and places where people may not have the space to build their own personal shelters often established communal shelters, either in the city's underground or within more sturdy buildings with cellars. If such buildings were not available in an area, new bunkers were built by the government or local communities. These shelters could be made from brick and would often be covered with dirt, both as an additional layer of protection from impacts, small though it may be, and, more importantly, to camouflage the shelter from above. At the altitudes that bombers would be flying at, a dirt or grass-covered shelter would be barely noticeable, while, say, a tin or stone roof would definitely be more noticeable. You might as well paint it neon orange at that point. Communal shelters often had their front faces painted white, or shelters built for the occasion might have been built from white bricks. White lines were also painted on the walls of surrounding buildings to guide people to the shelters. The reason for this is because the German air raids were conducted at night, when it was the most difficult for British anti-aircraft guns to see and shoot down the bombers. Even with the lights out, the bright white lines and front faces of the bomb shelters were clearly visible to those fleeing their homes on the ground. But being on the sides of buildings rather than, say, on the road, they would not be spotted by the bombers overhead. All of the walls in the Cap Kingdom are painted white, and on most walls you can also find secret hidey holes. And there's even one area directly to the right as you pass through the main gates that is very similar looking to an air raid shelter built into a cellar. And plus, all of these buildings topped with black top hats means that from above it looks like a bunch of black top hats. The brims of these hats would block the vision of the bombers even more so too. And speaking of nightly air raids, the lighting of the Cap Kingdom fits too. When you first arrive in the Cap Kingdom, there are a number of lamps scattered around the map. Some are tall streetlights, others are ground level lamps, and each of the airships also have lamps on them. These are used as target practice for Mario to throw his new hat power, and when I think about what I just said, it kinda makes me queasy. As said, the German air raids often came at night, and as such, they weren't looking for specific buildings, but light sources. Electric lights, gas lights, street lights, etc. These would show up clearly from any altitude, and that is what the Germans would use to establish their target. In response to this, households were told to put up thick blackout curtains in their homes, and streetlights were turned off early if they were ever lit at all. When you first arrive in Bonneton, all the lamps are out, and if you take a look at the airship windows, they appear to have blackout curtains. And when you look out from the Bonneton Island across the fog to the skybox, you can see that all of the tall buildings in the distance also have blacked out windows. However, if you come back afterwards, after all of the repairs are completed, the lights are all on again, even in the background. That is one fine detail, Nintendo. Nice! But right now, at the beginning, you are essentially standing in the epicenter of the disaster, and all around you, you can see the lucky buildings still standing, just like so many photos taken from the time. Even the fog may have something to do here. Beyond giving off the ghostly aesthetic of the world, it's not a good idea to get too close to the edge of Bonneton, unless you happen to possess, Capture, a hopeless Paragoomba, because the fog is a deadly one-way trip down. That is, of course, assuming it is just fog. Bonneton seems to be an island in the middle of a large river, or perhaps a distant island from the sea, which England is very, very full of. This could appear to be some low-level covering mist, but given the rest of the stage and its references to World War II, it could be something far more nefarious. Gas. To be clear, there were never any poison gas attacks on Great Britain during World War II, but it was an ever-present fear that the next shell heading your way could be filled with some unknown toxin. With Germany's use of chemical weapons on the front lines of World War I, the British government weren't taking any chances that those weapons would be used via a longer-ranged delivery system, such as rockets and air raids. To that end, British citizens were issued gas masks. Whether it's supposed to represent some terrible chemical cloud, suffocating smoke from a large fire, or just pea soup thick fog, all of those are images that one might imagine over London. And finally, with all of that in mind, let's take one more look at the inhabitants of the Cap Kingdom. They are all ghosts. They're all dead. In the single year between the summer of 1940 and 1941, the Blitzkrieg would take the lives of an estimated 40 to 43,000 civilians. And that's along with somewhere between 46 to 139,000 injuries, some minor but most life-changing. all from cowardly attacks on civilian population centers, including London, Cardiff, Birmingham, Manchester, Belfast, and many more. If there is one thing that best reflects the Blitz, it's death. It affected everyone. No one knew when their time would come, so for many, they were either burying someone they knew or were being buried themselves. It seems the people of Bonneton are just ghosts, bound to the material world through the hats they wore in life. The Bonnetons focus their concerns on their airships that have been destroyed, or one girl who is worried about her boyfriend at the top of the hat tower. They worry so much about these things that they fail to realize they are dead themselves. Maybe as a mechanism so that they don't have to face the truth that their time is up, that they didn't survive the air raid, doomed to linger like so many men, women, and children during the war, whose lives were taken faster than they could realize what was happening. Or maybe the Bonnetons do realize that they are ghosts, and that's that, because it's a Mario game. So what do you think? Is it plausible that Nintendo based this kingdom on World War II era London? Let me know down below, and until next time, never stop using your noggin. And if you want to help this channel stay strong, there are plenty of support links in the description. Well, do you mind? I'm in the middle of recording here.
Yeah, I can see that. And for some reason, I've found it in my good graces to stop you from making this travesty of a video.
Excuse me?
Were you really going to go along with that old cliche? Mario was dead all along? What happened? Did he meet a terrible fate? That's funny. I didn't see MatPat written on the office door.
So then what do you suggest I talk about?
Think, numbskull. What about all the war references?
What war references?
Did you even play the game? We don't work for Polygon.
Hey now.
Hey yourself. Think, man, think.
Well, it's gray.
Yes.
It's occupied by ghosts.
Uh-huh.
It's full of hats. The airships were hats, the ghosts were all wearing hats, and the tops of buildings were hats.
So you were paying attention. What hats were they?
Top hats?
The kind of hat you would stereotypically associate with what city?
London, I guess?
There you go. Seems like using this noggin does help.
There was an air raid by Bowser's forces and... Oh dear.
You're welcome. Think you can do the rest without me?
Mario made a reference to the Blitz!
Luxton?
Oh, this is horrible! Nintendo, why?
Roll intro.
This is a pretty incredible discovery, if I do say so myself, and I probably wouldn't have seen it if it wasn't for Andy, one of our writers, so kudos. But the Cap Kingdom does indeed seem to be based off of London, and other metropolitan areas following the Blitzkrieg by the Nazi German Air Force, or Luftwaffe, that word. And a lot of the features and the general gray aesthetic hints to this. When Mario is flung from Bowser's airship after failing to save Princess Peach, he crash lands in the dark and foreboding world of the Cap Kingdom. Where you lie, there are humped hills, textured with lighter gray lines. Between the hills is a thick rolling fog, and in the distance you can see a tower, your destination, with one of Bonneton. It's a dark and dreary place, and with good reason. Its gloomy aesthetic mirrors the tragedy and trauma faced by not only the kingdom, but Mario himself. Despite being the very first world in the game, essentially a tutorial level, it is also the world in which our fateful hero meets his untimely end. Mario was dead to begin with, and there is no doubt about that whatsoever.
Hold it, hold it.
Maxwell.